This week's Parshas are Parshat Chukat and Balak, which are the 39th and 40th Parshas of the Torah, and the 6th and 7th Torah portions in the 4th book of the Torah, which is the book of Bamidbar. And these two Parshas are filled with a ton of different stories and different things going on. It has got to be one of the busiest group of Parshas that we encounter. At the beginning of the Parsha, we are taught about the red heifer, or the red cow, the ashes of this red cow will be able to purify people who have been contaminated by dead bodies. So first we learn the laws of the red heifer and how it has to be, a perfectly red cow without any blemishes. After the story of the red heifer, we sort of jump to 40 years ahead. Well, not quite 40 years ahead, but we jump to the 40th year of the Jews being in the desert. They have now sort of completed their time wandering through the desert, and they are preparing as a people to enter the land of Israel. And it's at this point that Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, dies. And it was had been in her merit that the Jewish people had always had water throughout their time in the desert. And so now the people are thirsty. She dies and her merits die with her. And now the people are in the desert and they are thirsty. And again, they complain to Moses, why did you take us out of the land of Egypt where, we had water and we didn't have these worries and we didn't have these troubles? It wouldn't have been better for us to die in Egypt. And this obviously angers Moses again. And God tells Moses that what he should do in order to get water for the Jewish people is that he should speak to a rock, and then once he talks to the rock in front of the Jewish people, water will flow from it and the people will have water again. But Moses, he's angry again because of the Jewish people and because they continue to rebel and, think that their lives would have been better or easier back in Egypt. And in his anger, or in this moment of rage, he hits the rock instead of speaking to it, which were God's instructions. And God decides that Moses and Aaron will not enter the land of Israel, that they are going to die in the desert as well. And so the next thing we see is that Aaron dies. Aaron, the brother of Moses, dies, and his son Eleazar becomes the new Kohen Gadol, the new high priest who is going to lead the Jewish people in the different services in the temple. The next thing in the Parsha is that there is a snake that begins to attack the Jewish people, and it's really killing off a lot of people. And it's a plague that is spreading throughout the land. And so God instructs Moses to take a staff with a brass serpent on it, and he should go to each person who is sick and have them look up heavenward, and the plague stops and the people stop dying and they are healed. And then the people who have now been healed and now they have water again, they sing a song of praise to God for the water that they have had in the desert throughout their entire 40 years in the desert. So again, now the people are on the outskirts of the land of Israel, but they need a way to enter the land. And so they approach two kings. They approach different nations, asking if they can pass through their land. Two of the kings that they approach are Sihon and Og, which are Amorite kings. And they say, we won't touch anything, we won't use your resources, just please let us pass through your land. And both of them say no. And so the Jewish people go to war with these Amorite nations, and the Jewish people win and are able to conquer the lands. Then we go to a completely different story. So we leave the Jewish people behind for a moment, and we go to the story of Pollock and Balam. So Pollock was the king of Moab, and he summoned Baalam, who is a prophet, he wanted to hire Baalam to curse the Jewish people. He had heard a lot of things about Baalam and thought that he would be the right man. Now Baalam first asks God, and God tells him, no, you can't go. And so Baalam sends word back, I am a servant of God, I can only do what he tells me, I can't go with you. But the king is persistent. The king Pollock is persistent and comes back to Baalam again and says, I want you to curse the Jewish people. And he says, okay, I'll ask God. And God tells him he can go, but again that he, being Baalam, can only say what God instructs him to say. And Pollock, who knows this, agrees, and so the two go on their journey together. Now, while they are on their way, they encounter an angel of God, but they are not able to see this angel. But interestingly, Balaam's donkey who he has been with his whole life, this is Baalam's donkey, sees the angel of God. And because he sees the angel of God, he begins to sort of back away or to try to turn away in the road because the angel of God is blocking their path, blocking them from continuing. But Baalam doesn't see this angel, and Baalam just sees his donkey acting sort of erratically, and so he hits his donkey. And he hits his donkey a total of 3 times, each time the donkey is trying to move away. And God sort of causes this miracle to happen where the donkey of Baalam opens its mouth and begins speaking. And I wrote down here what the donkey says because I thought it was quite interesting, and I wanted to make sure I got the words right. So the donkey says, "What have I done that you struck me these 3 times? Am I not your she-donkey on which you've ridden since you first started until now? Have I ever been accustomed to do this to you?" And to which obviously Baalam can only say no. Basically, the donkey is standing up for itself. The donkey is saying, "Why are you hitting me? Have I ever acted this way? Have I ever begun backing away? Like, can't you see that there's some merit here?" And then the angel is able to sort of reveal itself to Baalam, and Baalam sees it and understands why his donkey did what his donkey did. I'm going to come back to this story in a minute, but just to sort of finish summarizing or to conclude how the Parsha ends is that Baalam goes and tries 3 different times to curse the Jewish people at Balak's request. But what comes out of his mouth, what God gives him to prophesize, end up being blessings and not curses. And he says these beautiful blessings about the Jewish people. And obviously Pollock is upset, but it's Baalam was only doing his job. And it's what he told Pollock as well, that he can only say what the words that God puts into his mouth. And those are words of praise and blessings for the Jewish people. And so they are blessed and not cursed. And then the Parsha ends on a different note, going sort of back to the Jewish people, which is that the Jewish people had begun to sort of mingle with the Moabites, and specifically the Moabite women. And the women sort of influenced the Jewish people to start worshiping their idol. And so there is another plague amongst the Jewish people. And it takes a sort of a specific incident to end the plague, but the plague does end at the end of the Parsha. Now, going back to the story of the donkey, which is where I think one of the many moral lessons we can learn from this Parsha are. So what's really interesting to me is that this donkey, the donkey of Baalam, was able to speak. So we don't really see anywhere else talking animals. And what it opened its mouth to say was sort of, again, in defense of itself, but saying, like, "You've known me a long time. Ever since you started writing, I have been your donkey, and I don't usually act like this. So why are you sort of upset with me when I'm acting differently? Instead of trying to figure out why I'm acting like this, or instead of, just forgiving me or whatever it happens to be, because you know me well enough to know that if I'm acting differently, I probably have a good reason." And I think that's really something that we can learn in our relationships with other people, that when we get to know people well, we have to give them some leeway. We have to give them some room, because if they act differently one day, let's say one day they're more upset, or one day they're, happy or angry or whatever, if they're not acting like themselves, then we sort of have to pause, and instead of getting upset with them or frustrated with them, we have to figure out, like, okay, I know them. They're not usually angry, sad, mean, rude, whatever it happens to be. So what is going on with them? Why are they acting this way? Try to understand some of the reasoning instead of just getting upset with them for sort of their attitude or the way that they are acting. If you can sort of take it back to the root, or just even ask them, like, what's going on? If Baalam would have asked his donkey, like, why do you keep going away from the road? Why won't you continue? Instead of, hitting his donkey, trying to sort of bring his donkey back into submission, I'm sure it would have had a different outcome. So instead of Baalam responding with anger, if he would have responded with words or with inquiry instead, I'm sure it could have really turned out better for him, and it probably would have prevented this whole story. But again, what we can learn from it is just that we should give people the benefit of the doubt if they are acting sort of out of line with the way they usually act, that we should forgive them, of course, but we should also just try to, like, understand or come to some sort of conclusion about, like, why they're acting outside of their norm. Because as the donkey pointed out, the donkey and Baalam have had this relationship for a long time, and the donkey's never acted this way before. So I hope each one of you has a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom.